New for version 10 is a new element called guidelines. Guidelines appear on the screen in three basic forms. A temporary guideline will be blue, a lasting guideline will be orange, and an active guideline will be a thicker orange line. There are also three types of guidelines, and they are lasting, multi-choice, and incremental or instant guidelines. To activate a guideline, all we have to do is hover your mouse over an element, any element, and we can see there a blue line has appeared. Now this is temporary. If I move away from the element, it disappears. If I touch it, it reappears. If I want it to become a lasting guideline, I slide along the guideline and it becomes orange. Now at the moment this is a thicker orange line because it's the last line that I've touched. If I select this and slide along, now this is the thicker line because it's the last one I touched, so this is the active guideline. Guidelines don't have to be straight lines. If I touch a circle or an arc, we can see here that there's a blue temporary guideline. If I slide out, that becomes an orange guideline. So rather than going to the edge of an object, if we go to a snapping point, we'll have two sets of multi-choice guidelines that will pop up. Now we might notice at the moment we've got our main direction guidelines on, as well as a secondary grid there. That secondary grid can be turned off by going to Options, Work Environment, Guidelines, and turning off the Fixed Angle option. Over here, while this palette's open, we can see the little symbols for parallel, perpendicular, angle bisect, and the tangent. These are the actual symbols used along the blue line on the multi-choice guidelines. Now that I've pushed OK on that, I might just get rid of this. So once I come back to this point again, we can see that we have only one set of guidelines that run parallel with our grid, and if I push the tilde key, I've obviously got my guidelines that correspond with the active guideline. We can see the little equal sign to the left and the perpendicular sign going up the page on the blue guideline that's going up the page. And once again back to there. So what this means, if I actually skew the grid by going to View, Grid Options, and Set Skewed Grid, if I move that to just say a 45-degree angle and move back to this point here, if we can see that my guidelines now are giving the main direction up and down the page and across the page like they were before, but now they're also a second set of guidelines there that allow us to lock into the grid once again. So our X and Y coordinates now are going up the page this way, so I'm just going to make that a lasting guideline. And of course we have the guidelines that represent the orthogonal directions of the grid. So now if I go back to Grid Options and go back to orthogonal grid, those lines are still there. I might just delete these guidelines. So we are back to how we started. In the case where the circle is the active guideline and we move our cursor to a snap point rather than an edge of something, we can see that we have the two sets of guidelines pop up, and if I push the tilde key, we go back to the first set of guides that I had, and we can see the tangent signs pop up along those blue lines. So I'm just going to move out a little bit, make that a lasting guideline. In order to select the other side of the circle, I have to make the circle the active guideline again. Go back to this point here, wait for the blue line with the tangent symbol to come up, drag out, and then make that also a lasting guideline. If I move back to this point, we've got our constant guidelines perpendicular to our grid again, and if I push the tilde button, straight up the middle of the circle we see the bisect symbol on the blue line. On the left hand side we see the right hand symbol and another bisect symbol. So I'm just going to move up there. So now I've drawn a line straight through the middle of that circle. It's worth noting that any object we touch, the constant will always be the perpendicular and orthogonal guidelines. They're always relative to the grid and the object that you're clicking on, but the secondary grid will always be relative to the active guideline. So at the moment we can see this guideline is active, and if I hover over this point here, there's our orthogonal guides. If I push the tilde key, we can see that now we have a parallel symbol, which is the equals symbol just there. Just going to undo that again. I can't move the mouse when I'm showing this. We see the equal sign there, the bisect, and then down this direction here is perpendicular symbol or right angle symbol. So that is the same everywhere there. Now just remove all those guidelines by pushing the escape key, or I could even go right mouse click, remove all guides. There's also a number of other ways of creating guides. For example, if I was to start drawing a line, for example, if I started at this point here, left mouse clicked, moved up to this point over here, if we leave our mouse there long enough, a bunch of other guides pop up. First of all, I'm going to make this one a lasting guideline by moving along it a little bit, and that is the input vector. If I come back to this point here, a circle pops up, and this gives us a radius from the point that we started at, and they can also remain lasting. So if I just push the right mouse button and remove all guidelines, this leads us to the third type of guidelines, which is an incremental type guideline. So if I left mouse click as I'm starting to draw this line, we can see that a guideline's popped out straight away as I've started to draw that line, and as I move around, every 15 degrees in this particular instance, a guideline is popping up, and as I move around, they incrementally jump every 15 degrees. This can be set up in our work environment to change that angle. Another neat thing about this tool is that as I start drawing, we can see that the angle is 0. Now this is the reference angle that the incremental guidelines are referring to all the time. However, if I just create another guideline, now that guideline will be relative to the active guideline. So now we're going to have 15 degrees increments going around from the active guideline. Now it is very simple to draw any angle off a skewed edge. First of all, make sure you've got a active guideline parallel to the wall that you want to draw from. Then as we draw, let's just say we draw a wall, left mouse click and start it, and as we start drawing that, I just type A and type 32 degrees, for example. Now we have a 32 degree wall off from this particular wall here. So far, all the ways that we've created guidelines have been from touching other guidelines or objects and shooting guidelines right across the page. However, if I choose not to do that and just choose an arbitrary point, I've left mouse click there and I'm drawing across the page, and if I click at another arbitrary point, instead of left mouse clicking, if I right mouse click and say place guideline, that will place a guideline right across the page. However, if I wanted to just place another arbitrary point but just a segment of a guideline, I can right mouse click and so convert to guideline segment. That will give me just a segment. The other thing I can do is if I touch a point, I can right mouse click once again and say place guide circle. So there's some other ways of making guidelines and guide circles without actually initiating them from touching something else on our floor plan area. Another way that we can use this functionality is if I, for example, if I wanted to draw a wall, I can left mouse click somewhere to initiate the wall, and then if I touch another guideline, we can see the pencil has changed form. If I right mouse click when it's saying that I'm actually over that guideline, I can say lock to guideline. Once I've done that, that wall will lock to that guideline, and now I can line up with any other object on our floor space. So if I left mouse click there, I can do that. Another thing I can do is if I have a guideline that's actually active, if I started drawing a wall, for example, along that guideline, if I right mouse click while the smart cursor is telling me that I'm locked to that guideline, I can say lock to guideline once again, and I can draw that wall and match it up to any other point or node on the screen, which is also a very valuable little function. So I might just clean this up a little bit now, delete this wall and this wall and this one here as well. We can also use the info tracker to create guidelines. So if I was to start drawing a line, an arbitrary line from anywhere in the info tracker, if I push D for distance and typed in 3 meters and then tab or A for angle, I can type, just say 25 degrees. Now instead of pushing enter here, if I left mouse click on this little icon here, it says mark position. As soon as I do that, we have the input vector drawn right across the screen. We also have a radius or circle drawn to mark that exact point, 3 meters and 25 degrees. Also, our multi-choice guidelines are there ready for us to choose any other guides that we may wish to create. So there's quite a few options there. These of course can be changed into lasting guidelines very easily. So I'm just going to right mouse click and remove all guidelines again. Just going to dimension the point from the edge of the building to the edge of this site, which has been a bit difficult in previous versions of ArchiCAD. But if I select the dimensioning tool now, make sure I'm on the skewed construction method. Then if I come down to the edge of my site, make it a permanent or active guideline, then pop over to here and select or make another guideline. If I push the tilde button, it should go back to the parallel to this point here. So now I've got my right angle there. Now I can just left mouse click there once, left mouse click there again, and push double click out here. That correctly dimensions the distance between the building and the edge of the site. Another application could be if I needed to place something that was no closer than 1500 to the building, I could type in D 1500, and I'm just going to left mouse click there, and that leaves the two guides there. Then I'm going to push escape. Now if I go to this point up here, for example, it gives me the tangents. If I push tilde, it gives me the tangents again. And now we can place a column or beam or anything we might like to at that particular point. And if I wanted to do that again, while I come to this point here, while I'm on the line tool, move it out 1500, click on this icon here, push escape, go to this corner, make sure that this is the active guideline, go back up to here. Once again, we can place a column at that exact right point. Another handy application for this tool, for example, if we needed to create a pathway that became no closer to a building than say 2 meters, I can select the line tool, click once, then push D, type 2 meters, click on this icon here, wait till I've got some permanent guides there, push escape. Then if I come down to this point here, I get my tangents, and now I can start drawing my pathway. And zip off up this direction, and there we can see we're no closer than 2 meters to the building. Last thing we're going to do is create a circle within 3 tangential lines. So first thing I'm going to do is create some lasting guides by touching each edge. So now I've got 3 guides there, and now as I touch one of those points, I select the bisect line of any 2 of those angles, and once I've got that, I've got a center point there. Now I can just draw a line, wait for the perpendicular sign to come up from that point there, and there's my circle tangential to that triangle. One last thing I neglected to mention before is that it's very easy to draw walls or any other object parallel or perpendicular to other objects on the fly. So first of all, I'm just going to hold my space bar down and trace the walls around that triangle, and then as I start drawing a wall, if I select any of these angles, create a lasting guideline, and I start drawing, straight away that guideline comes up. We can see the little equal sign right there. I can start drawing a wall equal or parallel to this other wall. Another technique is that if I start drawing a wall from anywhere, once I've actually started the wall, I can move my mouse and touch another object, and then a guide has come up. Now I have a parallel guide that I can refer to now that I've started drawing this wall. Even on the fly, if I touch this wall here, now I also have a parallel guide that goes up that way. We can see the little equal sign just where the pencil is, or the smart cursor, and I can draw that way. Even if I touch the bottom one, now I have a parallel guideline going in the same direction once again. If I do that again from here, I can start drawing. As I touch this other guide, we can see, push the tilde key down, we can see my right angle comes up there as well. So parallels and perpendiculars are very easy to draw now. So the guides are a fantastic new feature in 10, and it'll take a while to get the hang of it all, but it's certainly worth it.